Good morning. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about supply and demand and improving business performance using SyteLine forecasting. This solution will help you minimize excess inventory and shortages by improving your forecasting and inventory planning process. As we go through the presentation today, we invite you to send us your questions related to what you're seeing, and you can do that by sending them through the GoToMeeting chat panel. And what we'll do is we'll read those off at the end as we have a bit of a Q&A time right after the presentation. Our presenter today is Steve Baker. Steve has 20 years experience helping manufacturers improve efficiency and profitability using SyteLine. He's a CPA. He's an APIX certified production and inventory control manager. Steve managed a consulting practice for a worldwide consulting firm and also served as CFO for a multi-site manufacturer. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Steve.
Thank you. I'm going to get into showing you some of the concepts behind the forecasting application, and then we'll get into the actual application and I'll demonstrate some of those for you. Also, we're going to be covering to some extent the sales and operations planning module called SytePlan that works with the forecasting application. Both of these are what you call add-in applications to SyteLine, meaning that when you install them, they just go right into the SyteLine system and become part of your menu system, part of your database. They're products that that Infor supports. You purchase from Infor. And I'm just kind of the expert here to kind of explain at a high level how they work. And if you have an interest in either the forecasting application or the SytePlan application, you can follow up with Godlan, and they can arrange more detailed demonstrations for you. The main purpose of the forecasting application is to calculate forecasts. And so why do you need to do that? Well, if you have inventory, even if you don't have a formal forecasting process, you're somehow forecasting what your inventory needs are. Most companies I work with that use SyteLine that don't use this application have some sort of a spreadsheet or manual type approach for forecasting what their inventory demands will be. And the real purpose of this application is to help you come up with a more organized, repeatable approach for predicting what that demand is and right-sizing your inventory. This application fits into the overall material planning process that's built into SyteLine. This slide here kind of lays out in a very simple form what some people call MRP or planning or advanced planning and scheduling, whatever your name for it is. It follows this flow of that you put your demand into the system, and by demand I mean your forecasts and your actual orders from your customers. Then you run planning, and that explodes that demand and time phases it through your bills of material, compares that to what you have on hand in inventory and what you're planning to having on hand through planned jobs and purchase orders. Then the number crunching applies what I call inventory drivers to the equation, where it looks at what your desired safety stock levels are, order mins, lead times. And then the net effect of all this number crunching is that the SyteLine planning engine creates a plan, a suggested plan. This plan can be reviewed in what SyteLine calls the Material Planner workbench, where you can look at those plans and decide which ones you actually want to execute. Now, where this forecasting application fits into that flow of these 6 steps is what you see in blue and underlined. It calculates the forecast by a variety of methods, and it calculates safety stocks, order mins, lot sizes that all feed into the planning calculations. Now, there's different ways that the forecast can be calculated. Let me kind of overview those in general. The most direct, most common way is many times called statistical forecasting. This is where the system looks at what you sold or what you used, but more commonly it's what you sold in the past, and then applies a statistical algorithm to that demand history, and then calculates into the future what your forecast would be. You're allowed to adjust those calculations in two different ways. So after the model calculates a forecast, you can adjust it at a group level, be that product code, family code, planner code, all the different ways you have of grouping different items in SyteLine. So if there's something that would be an economic condition that might affect the sales for the whole company, you could apply a reduction or increase in the total demand that was calculated by the forecast model. Or you could do it just for individual product groups. For instance, a promotion or a new competitor enters the market. Down further in the adjustments, you can adjust individual SKUs for, if an item's going to be discontinued, or if there's a price adjustment that you think might affect demand in the future for just one particular item. So after the system goes through the statistical calculation, it applies the adjustments, and then you're allowed to review this before you post it into the SyteLine planning system. Another method, which involves more work, we refer to as collaborative or consensus type forecasting. So with statistical forecasting, very simply, you click one button and it can calculate forecasts for thousands of items very quickly. With collaborative forecasting, this might be where you want to forecast by salesperson or by customer or by warehouse, and you want to build up some information from multiple sources to get a forecast for each item. This flow chart on the screen shows what it would be like if you were going to forecast by customer. This example is that I've got 3 major customers that purchase an item from me, but then I also have some others. I mean, this could be one customer, it could be 10 customers, but just for example here, let's say we have 3. So what you do is you build up a forecast for each of those 3 main customers, and then you let the statistical engine forecast all the other customers that might be buying the item, and it's the total of those forecasts that become the consensus forecast for that item. As you're building up that consensus forecast for one of the customers, you're allowed to get multiple data points. For instance, the customer might give you a forecast. Their salesperson might have an opinion about what that customer might buy. There might be point-of-sale data to consider. Whatever, you're allowed to set up multiple data inputs and give them different weightings if you want to get scientific about it, and build up a forecast using the multiple opinions. Another method that's newer to the SyteLine functionality is the ability to forecast by customer or warehouse within the planning system. So if you don't want to go through the collaborative approach to forecast by customer, but you still want to have a customer level detail of forecast, you can use this function here, which works like the statistical forecasting system, but it ends up forecasting every customer and or all of your warehouses independently, and then can load that into the SyteLine planning system. And finally, and I don't know if there's, kind of went through 4 different general methods for forecasting. There's probably not many more I've ever heard of, but this last one would be what you would do with the SytePlan application. This is more of a sales planning integrated with forecasting approach. One example might be is that you want to forecast at the product code level or at the customer type level, and you want to forecast in dollars. The system allows you to do that with this drag and drop type of interface, and then it takes your dollar-based grouped forecast and disaggregates it down into item level forecasts. And what you can kind of see here on the screen, this little pop-up window here allows you to do this in what we say is multiple dimensions, meaning that you can forecast it by salesperson and then pivot on your plan and see it by product code, and then pivot on that and see it by customer type. And I'm going to demonstrate these to you in the actual application. So once you select kind of what method you want to use, and yes, you can mix and match those methods, then this is what your monthly process might look like if you were using the SyteLine forecasting application along with inventory planning in SyteLine. So the first step is the forecasting application collects your sales history or your usage history. You apply one of the methods we've talked about for calculating the forecasts. Then you're allowed to go in and review these forecasts and adjust them. And you can do adjustments, as I mentioned before, by different groupings or at the item level. You also can analyze the forecast in a variety of different ways by comparing the forecast against history, seeing how good of a job you did forecasting items in the past using different methods. So you have somewhat of a playground here to adjust and analyze and graph these forecasts you've been calculating to get happy with one. Then once you're happy with the forecast, you can calculate your safety stock levels by warehouse. Then you would update the planning system in SyteLine. The last, number 7 step here is that most companies will do this on a monthly basis. We have some that do it on a weekly basis. But you will have a forecasting cycle, and in between when you calculate your forecast, you might want to monitor what you've loaded in the planning system and compare it against what's actually happening. So the forecasting application does this monitoring for you and generates different types of alerts to tell you if your forecasts are tracking with what's actually going on. Point of this slide is that different items can be planned in different ways, all within the same system and location. So you might have some items that are short lead times, not very expensive, easy to plan for, and just managing by a reorder point is all you really need to do rather than running APS for them. So you can identify some items to manage by reorder point. Other items you might want to manage by using material planning, APS if you will, and you forecast the sellable items. Number C here is for if you're a make-to-order manufacturer, engineer-to-order, and you don't typically sell the same things over and over again, so really you don't have sales history that you can use to build a forecast, but rather you want to forecast the components that you use that are common to the items that you sell. So with SyteLine forecasting, you can either forecast the sellable items or you can forecast the components, and the system consumes the forecast for you in the forecasting application. Also, there's an approach we refer to as planning bombs. This isn't really the planning bomb concept that you get from the way that SyteLine uses the term. This is more the Ollie White concept of what a planning bomb is, where you have a family of products that you want to forecast as a group. One common way you might think of applying that is if you're a configurable item company, say bicycles, and you make custom bicycles, but they can have different handlebars, different seats, different wheels, and you don't want to forecast the final configured item, you'd rather forecast the whole family. Or maybe you manufacture a bunch of parts that tend to have a forecast that would be very similar. An example would be somebody who makes maybe 50 parts that go into a Honda Accord, and you want to forecast the Accord rather than forecast each one of the parts, because you know if you sell this part, you'll also sell that one. So those are just different ways of using planning bombs. And then finally, there's another module available called SyteLine, which allows you to plan inventory using more of a pull system, Kanban type environment approach. Mentioned the component level forecasting. This is something that you won't see in very many ERP systems, but it's very common in the SyteLine customer base to have companies that don't make the same items over and over again and do need to forecast at the component level. What happens is the SyteLine forecasting application takes over the consumption logic from SyteLine, so it is actually the usage of an item that consumes its forecast, as opposed to standard SyteLine that consumes a forecast by selling an item. This all works similar to the way that the SyteLine consumption works, in that there's look ahead, look behind parameters that you set up to control how the forecasts are consumed. Here's a couple of screens, forms that come from the planning bomb approach. This example is the bicycle, like I mentioned, where maybe it could be a custom bike that's painted red or green or blue or different colors. It can have different speeds on the gears, different wheels and seats. So you set up a P-bomb, planning bomb matrix like this, where you specify what % of the time any particular option might be selected, and then it shows you what the actual percentages have been over time and helps you maintain those percentages more accurately. Then it will track for you how many times you sell each configuration, if you do tend to repeat some configurations over and over. Let's jump into the forecasting application. I'll show you some of these concepts in the actual product. This is the home page, if you will, of the forecasting application. You'll see here on the left is a list of items. This would be the items that you've selected to forecast. It's not your entire item master. It's just those that you've marked as being used by this application. If you look at the grid view, spreadsheet view for this main form, it lists out some of the forecasting specific data points that will give you an idea of what it's tracking here. First thing I'll point out would be that it allows you to group items in different ways and goes beyond what's just in standard SyteLine. So of course you're familiar with, if you use SyteLine, with what a product code is, but you may want to have other groupings that go beyond product code and family code and planner code, so you can user define those over here in the forecasting application. It tracks what your average usage or sales has been and what your average forecast going forward is, purpose being that kind of a quick snapshot of does my history line up somewhat with what my forecast is. Here's the exception codes for as it monitors the forecast against what you're actually selling or using. It triggers things like a trending difference or a spike in demand or a review date being alerted. You can see here that there are different models that can be selected for different items. So you might have an item that you manage by reorder point and another one that you manage by a consensus approach to building the forecast, and another one that's a statistical model. And the last thing I'll point out here, service level is a key component to the calculation of reorder points and safety stocks. So that if you, now the basic concept behind service level is what you're telling the system what % confidence you want to have that you don't run out of inventory. So if you tell the system you want to be 95% confident that you don't run out, then it's going to suggest that you carry more inventory than if you're happy with an 80% confidence level. When you select a particular item, the system automatically pops up any notes that you've put in about maybe adjustments that you've made to the forecast. In this case, it's telling me that this item I just selected is going to be discontinued, which is something, of course, I'd want to be reminded of when I'm in here calculating forecasts. Show you how that's accounted for this particular item. In this bottom right-hand corner here, you can see what the statistical system calculated was 151 for every month. The green column is what's actually fed into the SyteLine planning system, and you can see here, since this item's discontinued after November, I put in manual adjustments that have, see at the item adjustment level, where I've zeroed out the calculated forecast so that a zero forecast goes into SyteLine planning. There's also a column here you see for the group adjustments. The way those are entered is in a rather simple grid matrix where you list out the different groupings and any of the members of those groupings that you want to put in an adjustment for. For example, let's say that you're planning a product promotion for your FG100 product line, which you have used product code to define that. And you believe that that product promotion will result in a 10% increase in sales each month through June, and then a 20% increase after that. So whatever percentages you put into this matrix flows through to all of the items within that grouping. So this item actually belongs to multiple groups, so you can see the 10% plus some other adjustments coming through for this first few months, and then the 20% plus some other adjustments coming through after that. So to kind of summarize the whole calculation, you get the 151 units is what the statistical engine calculated. We add 12% to that due to groups that this item belongs to. And then for the month of February, there was no item adjustment, which multiplying by 1 means don't change it at all. So 151 increased by 12% is 169, and that's what would go through to planning. You also can see here there's some graphs that show you the calculated forecast, the last year forecast, and then the adjusted forecast. And then there's sales history here for this particular item, and you can select here to look at the sales history in terms of bookings or shipments or dollars or units. But a more sophisticated way to evaluate your sales history is to use the sales analysis form. This is a drag and drop form that lets you pivot on different groupings and data for analyzing sales. So you put in a date range that you want to analyze historical sales, and when you generate your view, it defaults to where you're looking at sales by customer, and then if you open up a customer, you can see the items that customer purchased. You might look at that and say, well, we don't really analyze sales by customer. We prefer to look at it by item. You simply just move these icons around like this, and now I'm looking at sales by item, and if I explode a particular item, then it shows me the customers. Anything that I paint on the screen or highlight in blue here draws a graph down below. Those graphs can be built in different ways. I kind of like the bar chart. There is a pop-up window here that lets you select different dimensions and different measurements to build this sales analysis with. So if item level is too detailed for what you want to view, you'd rather look at sales by product code, then we just drop product code on here. I can get rid of the item level detail, and instead, say, of looking at sales by customer, I could look at sales by customer type. Now when I explode product code, I see sales by customer type, and then when I explode customer type, my distributors, here's my 3 main customers for distributor. And over here on the right side, you can pick different date ranges. You can look at sales in dollars, quantities. You could look at open order dollars as opposed to sales history, so looking at a backlog in this sort of a drag and drop pivot table view. Go back to kind of how you calculate the forecast, so that's helpful there for analyzing sales history. But what if you want a playground for calculating forecasts in different ways and seeing how you can come up with something that you feel comfortable with? On the calculations tab for this particular item, I can see that I'm using a horizontal statistical model. That's why you see here that every single month is 151 units, because I told it I wanted to see a flat forecast. Maybe that's not the best way to forecast this item. I look at the history, and I find looking at graphs are a little bit easier to draw conclusions about trends than looking at the actual numbers. This graph shows me in blue 2 years of historical sales, and in red it shows me what my forecast is. So you can see that the red forecast does a pretty good job of picking up the average of what happened over the last 2 years, but it's certainly not picking up what appears to be some seasonality in the demand of this item, where, you know, in the summertime I get a little bump in demand and then a lot of orders at the end of the year. So I'm not one to want to go through and figure out which one of these statistical models might fit my situation best. I would rather just tell the system to do that for me. That's the automatic selection. And it runs all the different models and ranks them by what fits the history patterns the best. And as you might have guessed with this one, it's telling me that my seasonal model fits better than any other model. And I'm going to accept its recommendation here. It kind of ran some checks on me there and said, hey Steve, you just told me you want to use the seasonal model, but you told me to only use 12 months of history, and it would be much better to use at least 24 months of history to find a seasonal pattern. So I'm going to go along with its suggestion there, let it finish the calculation, and now you'll see that in my blue column here, the calculated forecast is no longer a flat number. It varies from period to period. And if I pop up this graph, I'm in a playground mode still here, so this is just me testing out to see what would happen if I selected this, and it's showing me that, yeah, my red forecast here does do a pretty good job of picking up the seasonality of the last 2 years of this item. There's also, as I mentioned, the collaborative approach to forecasting as opposed to the statistical that we just went through. With collaborative, kind of as I mentioned in the overview, it is a bit more work, but if you're getting forecasts from your customers and you want to collect those and then compare against other opinions, this gives you a nice tool for organizing all that information. So I'll show you here, I've got 4 items in my system that I've decided to use the collaborative approach for. I'll focus on the FA10,000. If I explode the FA10,000, I can see I've got 2 customers that I've forecasted. And the way this works is when I highlight a customer, then it shows me all of my detailed data or my multiple opinions I've got about that customer purchasing this item. So coordinated bicycles, I can see here what the customer gave me for their forecast versus what their salesperson thinks they would buy. And with this interface, I can put in multiple opinions, or maybe you only want to collect just the customer forecast and you don't care about collecting salesperson input or product line manager input, but we give you places to put those if you need, and we give you a way to record a lot of notes about how you've come up with the forecast for each item, for each customer, for each period. Maybe this method of customer level forecasting isn't what you want, but rather forecasting by warehouse or by individual salesperson forecast. You can structure this hierarchical view to where it rolls up from different levels of detail. Just for demonstration purposes, we've gone with the forecasting by customer approach. And the last thing I was going to show you in the forecasting application was calculating safety stocks and reorder points. So the way SyteLine works is, of course, that data is stored at the warehouse level, so you can select a particular warehouse and calculate the safety stocks for all items in that warehouse if you desire, or just ranges. For my example here, let's say I want to look at my warehouse main. What happened when I gave it that warehouse is it returned for me all the items that I keep in that warehouse, and then shows me the information it's going to use to calculate my safety stock and reorder point and lot size and order min. So it needs to know the lead time, my desired service level for that item, the variability in demand. So if you sell 100 units a month every single month, then you don't need a lot of safety stock because it's very predictable what your demand is going to be. But if you sell 10 units one month and 1,000 the next month, and in other words, you have great variability, which we calculate as what's known as a mean average deviation. It's a measure of variability. So the higher the variability, the more inventory it's going to suggest that you carry in order to accomplish your desired service level. And then, of course, it needs to know what your average usage is. So it uses all those factors to come up with an optimal safety stock or calculated safety stock. So let's look at this CP10,000. I can see that in my warehouse, right now have specified that I want to keep 20 in safety stock, but the system has calculated that really I only need to have 7. It also has calculated a reorder point for me. So if I am not going to forecast this item, but rather I'm purely going to manage it by reorder point, then I would set my reorder point to 14. So as I review these calculations, compare them to what's already in the system, I can check off the ones I agree with, or I can override values if I desire, or I could check everything and then just unselect the ones I don't like. But whatever I have checked, when I come back over to the main form, when I select Post to SyteLine, it'll take each item that's been checked and update the safety stock for that item. You can see also here there's a lot of detailed information to help you in analyzing the safety stock and reorder point. One thing that's kind of handy is this little graph right here that shows me, depending on different service levels, how much safety stock would I need to carry to accomplish that service level. So at a 80% service level, I need to carry 7 in safety stock. At a 99% service level, I need to carry almost 20. And here's a graph of my historical usage of this item where I can kind of see sort of what the average is and get an idea of the variability graphically. I'll jump on over to the SytePlan application for a briefer review of it. Then I dealt into with the forecasting application. So the SytePlan application can work with the forecasting application, or you can use it standalone. The main purpose of it is to provide you with a set of tools that are built right into SyteLine that help you manage a sales and operations planning process, which really, for those of you who haven't worked with an environment like that before, the main idea behind it, according to APIX, is just that it's a cross-functional management team working together to balance supply and demand. The primary thing that this team works on is setting goals and tracking attainment to the goals, managing the supply chain and production, managing inventory levels, and managing the backlog and on-time performance. Of course, there's a lot more to it than just that, but that's kind of the general categories. And so what this application does to help with that general plan is it helps you build those sales goals and gross margin goals and production goals, and link those in with a tool to present your attainment of those goals in S&OP meetings with the team. So the types of plans and goals the application helps you build is a revenue plan, gross margin plan, production units plan, a workforce headcount plan, a rough cut capacity plan, as well as a materials demand plan. Then it provides you with a variety of reports, tools, interactive forms that help you identify obstacles to accomplishing the goals that you've developed. These are just examples I have on this slide, but some of these forms are designed to point out where you're selling more or less than you planned, where you're changing your forecast too suddenly for production to be able to respond to those adequately, where you're building up inventory or having inventory shortage problems, on-time delivery problems with shipping to your customers, or on-time delivery with your vendors delivering to you. To kind of take those points that the system is trying to show you that are impeding your process towards accomplishing your plan, this is a flow of the forms that tie in with those points. So step one is, as I mentioned, building a plan. There's a tool in the application called the SytePlan workbench, and it allows you to build a multi-dimensional, top-down, dollars and units sales plan, as well as a cost plan, margin plan. And it gives you a series of reports where you can develop multiple plans and compare one plan to another plan, compare a plan against previous years, copy one plan, modify it, and then do what-if analysis compared to other plans. I'll show this tool to you here in a moment. Then step two of the process is to, after you have your plans, is determine how do I stay on track to achieve those plans. Really, there's kind of two sides to that. One would be you're in the middle of a month and you want to see how are you doing so far this month and what do you need to do for the rest of the month to be able to accomplish the plan. The forms in that area we refer to as the current month analysis, and these actually show you your goals and where you stand, and then they project through the end of the month what, based on your sales so far through today and any demand supply problems you have, it'll project what your sales and inventory levels will be by the end of the month if your current supply demand issues aren't resolved. Then there's the ability to look out beyond just where we are right now and through the end of this month for evaluating supply versus demand and doing staged inventory projections out into far future, analyzing your rough cut capacity, planning hires and doing labor budgeting, both dollars and people. And then finally, a lot of analysis tools that are great for presenting in your S&OP meetings, which shows how did we do last month versus our plans. A forecast stagger chart that shows what the forecast is and how close it was to what actually happened and how the forecast changed over time. Some tools that let you analyze at a high level on-time performance with your customers and from your vendors and drill down to details in real time right there in your meetings. And then some sales analysis, variance analysis type tools that you can look at forecasts and sales plans and compare them to what actually happened. With the time we have, I won't go into a great deal of detail in this application. Just wanted to get the idea out of what it is, but I will show you the workbench that I referred to that you use to develop the main plan, something we call the annual operating plan for the business. This is the home page for SytePlan, Sales and Operations Planning module, following the home page concept that you see throughout SyteLine with the most commonly visited forms here and then some graphs. So here I see top customers in a graphical format. I can see what my forecast is versus my plan and actual, a summary level analysis of where I stand with plan versus forecasts and bookings and supply side as well. My annual operating plan, some people might refer to the annual operating plan as being a sales and margin budget. We're just kind of using the APICS term for it. And then tasks that have been assigned to different members of the S&OP team. So this is uses the task system within SyteLine. However, it allows you to look across multiple people in a team as opposed to just looking at one individual's task. The workbench, it works a lot like the sales analysis tool that I showed you in the forecasting application with the drag and drop functionality and the ability to pivot on different dimensions. However, whereas with the sales analysis, it was a read-only, basically analysis report, this is an interactive tool with gives you the ability to change things in a top-down format. So when you're building a plan, you first want to tell it what you want to start with, and then you can adjust from that starting point. Options might be that you want to just look at past sales history, and you want to build a plan that's either a flat, just average plan for each period, or you want to build a seasonally adjusted plan. Or I could look to see what's currently in my forecasting application and use that as my starting point for my high-level plan. Or I could grab a plan from last year or one that I've been playing with and I want to have multiple versions and maybe pick the one that fits best after comparing them. So this is what that form would look like once I generated it with some data in it, if I'd found any. But what it shows me here is whatever level I want to build the plan, whether that be customer type or market segment or product code, and then I can build levels underneath that. And it fills out my plan using the averages for this period I've specified. And then I can go into any cell within this grid, whether that be at a low-level detail and adjust it and it will roll up to the top, or I can go to the total for a particular product code or a total for a month or a total for the whole year and adjust it, and it will push that change down to all of the lower levels below that. So top-down or bottom-up type of adjustments, and those adjustments can be applied by any of the dimensions that you've selected here and displayed on the form. And all of it is then graphed down below with a legend being built to show you what you're building as you go. And then you can keep notes in the plan underneath this Chart Options tab where you can record what changes you've made and why you made them. After you've built your plan, then you have the ability to report on it, comparing it to different things. For instance, here, this report, call it the master report, lets you pick dollars and units and prepare a plan by month, by quarter, where you compare your plan to your forecast, or you compare one plan against another plan, or you compare your plan to your actuals for a previous year. So you just kind of pick and choose between what goes in the compare selection versus the compare to selection, and when you run it, it builds this report for you. Current month analysis is one I mentioned before earlier that lets you see the entire supply and demand picture all on one form. That's very good for presenting to a group in a weekly S&OP meeting, where you're seeing what your potential problems are and projections through the end of a month. So it shows me here what my demand plan is, be that the plan and the forecast and what we've shipped and is in the backlog. Next to that shows me my supply plan, and then uses that data to give me a constrained projection of what my sales will be at the end of the month based on what's in my backlog, what's in my supply plan, and what can be completed by the end of the month based on my plan. It then shows me where I have potential problems with things that are in the backlog and due this month but will not be able to be shipped because of a inventory supply problem, and then projects out my finished goods level, item by item, or product code by product code, or family code by family code, so whatever level you want to view this data. This form shows me how my forecasts have changed over time and how those forecasts compared to what we actually sold. So you see here on the green line is my annual operating plan. In between is my forecast and how it changed from period to period, and then in blue is what the actual sales were. So a way this might be used is that for the item I've selected, I can see that in January we were forecasting 1 unit for April, and in February we changed that forecast to 234, and then in March we changed the forecast for April to 662. So you're seeing how over time this forecast has changed, and with this particular item obviously would be a problem for a material planning group to keep up with changes that are jumping around that much. This weekly summary also takes the supply and demand picture, putting it all together, and then lets you project into the future for an item or a group of items what your either dollars or units of inventory will be at different points out in the future, and how many weeks of supply you will have at those points. So you could pick weekly buckets or monthly buckets. In this case, we've got monthly, obviously. And so it looks here across and sees what demand is, what supply is, and projects in this case I've selected units, so at the end of February we'd have 116 units based on our current plans, and that 116 units would be 3 weeks of supply of that item. Rough cut capacity planning allows me to see what head count or how many hours of capacity are needed in my different resource groups. So these represent months across the top here, so looking out for 18 months, I believe this goes into the future, maybe it's 2 years. It shows you, you select either hours or head count, and will display for you what rough level of capacity is needed in each one of your resource groups based on the plans that you currently have in SyteLine. We provide some drill down to detail type tools for analyzing on-time performance, as I mentioned, both for customers and vendors, where it graphs your on-time performance over time, and then you can drill down in this grid form here, and it'll give you the detailed orders that that are graphed into the summary above. We have drag and drop type analysis for comparing your forecast to your actuals, comparing your sales plan and margin plan to what actually happened over time, and then again, like the other tools, pivoting by different dimensions and dropping in different types of measurements to compare what your plan was versus how well you did against it. And then finally, the last area is workforce planning, where you can build, again, these multi-dimensional drag and drop type plans with hours, head count, and labor cost levels, where it can be viewed by department, by employee, different time periods, and you can incorporate planned hires, planned pay changes, overtime, things like that to work up a labor budget and a hiring plan.
Thanks, Steve. Great job in the presentation. Folks, again, we appreciate you taking time from your very busy day to spend with us here. Again, if you would like further information, if you have additional questions, please send them to the email address I gave just a minute ago, info@godlan.com. We'll be very happy to follow up with you. Thanks for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.